Ohio State fans, we are here live at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. If you hear slamming going on in the background, that's Jonathan Cooper, former Buckeye defensive end who plays for the Denver Broncos, currently doing some workouts right over to our right here. So a little noisy, but we'll try and talk out here. I'm here with Dave Biddle. I'm Patrick Murphy. We're here for Bucknuts 247 Sports. We appreciate you tuning in, whether it's live or you're listening to this after the fact. Please like, subscribe, all that good stuff. That really helps us out. Dave, they just finished up, the Buckeyes, that is, second spring practice. We were here on Tuesday, saw a little bit of the first spring practice. Didn't get to see practice today, but did get to interview the running backs and wide receivers. So we're going to kind of go through that. First of all, the wide receiver position. We know Jackson Smith-Njigba's back. He had a big season. Marvin Harrison came on at the end of the year in the Rose Bowl, and they've got a lot of depth behind them. What does this room look like to you? How do you see this playing out when we get to the fall with kind of all the guys that they have that can step on the field?
Yeah, to me, there's a clear top four here, and I would put them in this order. I would go Jackson Smith-Njigba, and this is just my opinion. The coaches aren't saying this, and I think you have a different opinion on this. I would go Jackson Smith-Njigba. That's one I think everyone would agree on. Number 2, Marvin Harrison. Number 3, Emeka Egbuka, and you really could, in my opinion, could flip-flop 2 and 3. I like that top 3 a lot. But I do think Julian Fleming is number 4. And I might be in the minority there, but I think right now Julian Fleming, I would have him 4th. And you're stacked if Julian Fleming is your number 4 wide receiver and entering his junior season. And again, I could be wrong. Maybe he'll be higher than that. But I think all 4 of those guys are going to play. And then Jaden Ballard's a guy that's coming on. It's drawing high praise from the coaches. I think he's going to be that number 5 receiver. Probably he's not going to play a lot unless guys – hopefully there's no injuries. But that would be his path to playing times if guys get hurt because – typically Brian Hartline's not playing 5 receivers a lot. You got to really be in that top 4. You could argue you got to be in that top 3. Last year we didn't see Marvin Harrison and Emeka Egbuka really that much till the Rose Bowl, and then we saw especially what Marvin could do. It was really cool talking to those guys today. We'll get more specific about that, but I love the depth at wide receiver. They still have Cam Babb. He's had several ACLs, but he's full go here for spring. It's amazing. We'll see if he can stay healthy, but I think they've got a clear top 4, and then Jaden Ballard's going to be that guy, that 5th guy that's kind of an up-and-comer.
It's interesting you mentioned the rotation because we've seen Brian Hartline in the past when, they had Terry McLaurin, Johnny Dixon, KJ Hill, all that group of receivers. There was a good amount of rotation between that group. Last year, not so much, as you said. And Brian Hartline talked last year. When he was a player and they had established themselves, he wanted to be on the field for every snap. It's a bit of a change in philosophy. Do you see that more as just Marvin Harrison and Emeka Egbuka weren't ready to be regular contributors? We saw them some. Or do you see that as Brian Hartline wanting to go with guys that had really proved it, Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, and then Jackson Smith?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both because they were true freshmen. So even though they're going to be superstars in my book and maybe as early as this year, but I think it was mostly the fact they had 3 first-round wide receivers. And he's like, and listen, and Harrison probably will be as well. Egbuka might be, Fleming, they might be, but he knew last year. I've got 2 guys that are going to be first-round picks in the 2022 draft, and Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave, and I got another one in Jackson Smith-Njigba, and I am not going to take those guys off the field unless I need to or unless they're gassed. Even though I've got these talented true freshmen over here, I'm keeping my studs on the field. So it doesn't mean just because he did it like that last year, he's always going to do it that way, but still, I still feel like you're going to need to be in that top 4 to really get a lot of playing time. Now, Jaden Ballard's going to get playing time. There's no doubt about it, but it might be, more, a lot of playing time when the game's in hand. Now, he's going to get some playing time when the game's on the line. Don't get me wrong, but again, if you're out of that top 4, it's going to be tough to get a lot of playing time at wide receiver for the Buckeyes.
Yeah, Julian Fleming's probably where we differ on our opinions of the pecking order, and this again, just opinion. This is a guy, if healthy, I think really, really has ability. I asked him today, he looks bigger. I mean, he looks different than he's not tall like Marvin Harrison, though apparently there's some discrepancy on Marvin Harrison's height. I heard you discussing.
He's definitely 6'4". They list him at 6'3". And Marvin Harrison, especially given the fact his father's a Hall of Fame wide receiver, and he's, everything he did in the Rose Bowl and even his accolades in high school. But Marvin Harrison Jr. could not be any more humble. I mean, this is a soft-spoken, humble, just good young man. But he's like, yeah, I'm 6'4". They list me at 6'3". You got to help me out here. So I went and talked to Jerry Emick and Mike Bassford, 2 SIDs, do a great job, and said, we got to get this guy 6'4". We got to get it 6'4" in the media guide. So we'll see if they make that change. I cannot call myself 6'3" if they're listing Marvin Harrison Jr. at 6'3".
Well, I can't either.
He's at least an inch taller than me. I mean, at least. So I've been lying to everybody saying I'm 6'3". So he's definitely 6'4", definitely. So he's another guy, man. Like Pat's talking about how, Julian Fleming just looks jacked, and he does. Marvin Harrison's not jacked, but he said he's about the same weight, but he's a lot stronger, and he's dropped his body fat, and he just feels great and looks great, and the coaches are talking him up. I mean, you guys saw what he did in the Rose Bowl. I mean, he's going to be a stud this year. He's not going to be a stud. We're not talking about like next year or whatever. This year, he will have a big year. I'm not going to say he's going to have as big of a year as Jackson Smith and Jigba did as a sophomore, but Marvin Harrison Jr. will have a huge year this season in this offense.
Yeah, you saw it in the Rose Bowl. I mean, what he can do, especially in the end zone, high pointing those balls, things like that. But you mentioned Jackson Smith and Jigba. Most of the time we saw him a year ago, he was playing out of the slot. Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson were the outside guys. He was the slot guy. Now that changed some, especially in the Rose Bowl. He played more outside. The talk is from the coaching staff that they're going to move him around a lot this year, and that all these receivers are coached to play each position. That it's not just you're here to play the X or you're here to play the Y. You're playing a different position. Moving Jackson Smith and Jigba around not only frees up other guys to get on the field, Emeka Egbuka, who was a backup slot receiver last year, other guys, but it probably diversifies this offense a little bit, doesn't it, Dave?
It does, for sure. And I like the idea of moving Jackson Smith and Jigba around. I do think he's going to play mostly in the slot. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Had arguably the best season by an Ohio State wide receiver ever. Definitely the best statistical season. Now, you could say, like, I'm not saying that Jackson Smith and Jigba is better than Chris Carter and all the other great players that have played at Ohio State, but man, that was a fantastic season. The point of the matter is, though, I agree with you, Patrick. I think it does make them more versatile, makes them more dangerous. Guys moving around, and it will give guys more of an opportunity to play. I think they will be able to get those top 4 guys playing time this year at wide receiver instead of just the top 3 last year. So not a huge change, but again, if you're that 4th guy, you're actually going to see the field this year. And if you were the 4th guy last year, you were not seeing the field. So, and another guy that they're going to be, playing not a wide receiver role. He's definitely a running back, but Evan Pryor is going to help out a little bit in the pass game. And Trayvon Henderson is going to catch balls out of the backfield. We have a question: how does Trayvon Henderson look? He looks fantastic. It was great interviewing him. I mean, he was jacked last year as a true freshman, especially for a guy that's known for being a game breaker. I mean, he's a tough kid, though, and he was talking about that. That's the number one thing you have to have as a running back is toughness. I completely agree with that. And he was talking about, the things that the coaches want him to do. Don't worry about hitting the home run. Get those 5 yards. Get those 5 yards. Kevin Wilson was talking about that. You collect those nickels. Eventually, you're going to add it up, and you're going to have $1. You're going to have the touchdown. Don't try and get the $1 right away. Get those nickels, add them up, and eventually you're going to have that touchdown. So, and Travion talked about that. Another cool thing I just want to throw out there, name, image, and likeness. Travion grew up, he wasn't dirt poor, but he said, they struggled. His mom worked 2 jobs, and he had to share a bedroom with 2 of his siblings, so 3 kids to a room. He's now able to take care of his mother. She doesn't have to work anymore because of name, image, and likeness. That's really cool.
It's awesome.
He's got a couple of different NIL deals, so really cool stuff. And he talked about that, how he's able to now take care of his mother. What a cool thing. As a sophomore in college, really still a freshman in college, still his freshman school year. So really cool stuff there. Yeah,
that is awesome. Dave, one of the other things he talked about, and I'm not sure Ohio State's going to be too happy he talked about this. He said last year he suffered concussion during the game, was being checked on the field, off to the sideline. I don't know if you were over there when he was talking about that.
That was not you. You were telling me about it.
Yeah, but I mean, my point of this is he's a guy who did get banged up last year. Multiple times he didn't come back into games. Now, usually that was when the games were out of hand. Kevin Wilson made it pretty clear, Ryan Day as well, they're going to need multiple running backs this year, not just late in games, but Mayan Williams, Evan Pryor. It sounds like these guys are, they're not the number one. That's Travion Henderson. But whether he's dinged up, if that becomes a thing that happens to him, or if he just needs a break, these 2 other guys need to be ready. You mentioned Evan Pryor already, but Mayan Williams is back too after a pretty good year last year. Maybe not exactly what he envisioned when he started the season, but a solid year, I think, is the number 2 back.
Yeah, I really like Mayan Williams. I think he needs more carries this year. It's tough, though, because, there's only one ball, and, Travion Henderson is the starter, and he's going to be even better. He set freshman records around here last year, and he's going to be even better as a sophomore. But I love Mayan Williams. You need 2 running backs, at least 2. I mean, I like the old phrase, pair and a spare. You really need 3. Evan Pryor's probably not going to play a lot, even though I said, he can add a different element unless there's injuries. I really think that 1-2 punch, though, with Travion Henderson and Mayan Williams is extremely dangerous. I love what Mayan brings to the table. He's so good. If it looks like it's going to be a 2-yard run, it's a 5-yard run with Mayan. I love that about him. So I think he needs to be a bigger part of the offense this year. And keep in mind, there's less cooks in the kitchen this year. Master Teague, they had to try and keep him happy last year.
Yeah.
So I think just naturally, Mayan Williams is going to have a bigger role in the offense this year.
Yeah, and Evan Pryor, in terms of catching passes, like you were talking about, was talking about doing some of the things they did with Jackson Smith and Jigba last year, where he lined up as a running back and then came out running routes, catching passes that way. He said, I can do that stuff. We don't have to put Jackson back there. So it'll be interesting to see how they do that. You could disguise it a little bit more because obviously Evan Pryor, being a running back, will be back there to carry the ball at some times. Travion Henderson can do that stuff too. We've seen that in the past. We talked to the running backs, wide receivers today. That's why we hit on them so much here. But we also talked to Kevin Wilson. We talked to Ryan Day, and we talked to Jim Knowles on Tuesday. What maybe one or two things that stood out to you from those interviews, and maybe if there's anything from practice that we saw on Tuesday, since we weren't able to do this, that we should share with fans?
Yeah, I think the number one thing, I continue to be extremely impressed with Jim Knowles. And I asked him about his philosophy when it comes to teaching proper tackling, because Ohio State's not been a good tackling defense the last few years. And we remember back to 2014 when they won the national championship, they were using rugby-style tackling, and they had the least amount of missed tackles in the country. So not a coincidence that they were the national champions that year when you have the least amount of missed tackles in the country. So I was curious to get his take on that. And he gave an insightful, 4-minute answer. I also wanted to know, to be a good tackling team, do you actually have to practice tackling, bringing guys to the ground? Because it feels like, going into, and I'll get to his answer in a minute. Before hearing his answer, I was thinking, to be a good tackling defense, you need to practice it. And I know it's a fine line. You don't want to get your guys hurt, but if you want to be a good tackling defense, you need to actually practice bringing guys to the ground. Well, I've now changed my mind because Professor Jim Knowles has brought me over to the good side. He said, no, you don't need to practice bringing guys to the ground. It's all about taking proper angles, and you can work on this all year round, even when you don't have pads on. It's about proper hip integrity, whatever you want to call it, shooting the hips and having the proper angle, not going for big hits, wrapping up. And he does teach rugby-style tackling. I love it. I absolutely love it. Rugby-style tackling, not only is it safer, it's more effective. You're getting guys to the ground. You're a more sure tackler. You're not going to have the big hits, but they don't want to have these big hits. They're trying to save guys' career. You don't want to get guys kicked out of the game. It's not just about protecting the other team, but protecting your own guys. Yeah. Guys, we see it all the time. Guy flies in to make a big hit, and he knocks himself out. And he might get kicked out of the game while he's doing it or get a flag, and he knocked himself out by trying to make a big hit. No. And a lot of times you're missing a tackle. You're bouncing off guys when you're trying to do that. So I love what Jim Knowles is teaching with the defense and what he's doing with tackling. One quick thing, I'm long-winded here. Kevin Wilson, I mentioned this on our podcast yesterday. Everybody saw this. I love something Kevin Wilson said, because a lot of people, myself included, Patrick, have said Ohio State had the best offense in the country last year. And if you look at the stats, they did. Number one total offense, Ohio State Buckeyes in the entire country. This includes the group of 5 schools who, it's usually one of them. Number one scoring offense in the country, Ohio State. And Kevin Wilson was asked about that, about being the best offense in the country. He said, we weren't the best offense in the country last year. We lost 2 games. You can't lose 2 games and be the best offense in the country. Now, he goes, we were a great stat offense, but they, I love that attitude. I love that attitude because it'd been easy to say, yeah, we lost 2 games, but it was because of the defense. Not that he's going to throw the defense under the bus, but right. You know what I mean? I love that attitude of Kevin Wilson. It's like, no, we've got to get better. And specifically stuff like the short yardage, they need to be much better in short yardage. And I think that's something Justin Fry, the new offensive line coach, is going to bring. That's something Travion Henderson mentioned today. I just like that attitude out of Kevin Wilson. It's not like, yeah, we're the number one offense in the country. It's like, no, we weren't the number one offense in the country. Stats don't matter if you're losing 2 games, including to your rival.
Right. Yeah, that short yardage thing is huge for me, what they need to improve on, because you can't just rely on the passing game to have big plays. When you get down close, you get in the red zone, you get in third and short, 4th and short, in middle of the field. You need to be able to trust your offensive line can get that push. Your running backs can then pick up those couple yards. You mentioned those nickels that add up to $1. If you're on the 3-yard line, you got to be able to punch that in. Too often last year, Ohio State wasn't able to do that. And so, yeah, that stood out to me as well with Kevin Wilson. Couple questions here. We'll end on those. We were asked by Greg Wilson here about Zach Harrison and how he fits in the fold. Dave, just the defensive ends in general. It's a position the last couple of years hasn't been as productive as they have in the past. We haven't seen the kind of next emergence of the Bosa brothers or Chase Young. Zach Harrison was thought to be that guy. Obviously, JT Tuimoloau, Jack Sawyer, now in their second years. How do you see the defensive end room playing out once we get to the fall?
Yeah, I'm glad Zach Harrison's back. I do think it's going to be. I think there's a clear top 3 there in whatever order with JT Tuimoloau, Jack Sawyer, and Zach Harrison. Jack Sawyer. Did I say Zach?
Sawyer. Yeah. You're good.
Did I say Jack? Okay. Jack Sawyer. We call them both Sack Sawyer and Sack Harrison. I'm getting them confused. Now, to be clear though, Jack Sawyer plays like kind of a different position than Zach Harrison and JT Tuimoloau will in this defense. Like they'll be more of the strong side end, and Sawyer will be a rush end. But those are your top 3, and then Javonte Jean-Baptiste is going to be in there. They've moved Mitchell Melton to defensive end. I think that's an interesting development, but a clear top 3, I think. And for those of Buckeye fans, just remember Steve Miller's 2014 season. He was a guy that came in highly touted, and not as highly touted as Zach, but highly touted. Didn't really do much his first 3 years, and then broke out as a senior. Didn't have a crazy good year as a senior, but had a good year. Had that huge pick 6 against Alabama in the semifinals. I expect Zach Harrison to be a better version of what Steve Miller was that year. Zach Harrison, while has been a disappointment his first 3 years, his first 3 years in the program are still better than Steve Miller's first 3 years. So I think Zach Harrison's going to have a good year this year. But he's going to have to battle because you're going to have JT Tuimoloau, Jack Sawyer, Javonte Jean-Baptiste, and like I said, Mitchell Melton's also moved down there. And there's some other guys I'm sure I'm leaving out.
Yeah, it should be interesting. Larry Johnson, we obviously trust him to get that right, especially when he has the talent. We were also asked, Dave, your Western Michigan friend, Glenn Dickens, how are the tight ends looking? I think that's an interesting position. Kevin Wilson, another thing that stood out to me, and he's brought this up before, but
he wants to know about Western Michigan's tight ends, how they're looking, how the Broncos tight ends are looking.
Well, I can't help
I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
But Kevin Wilson made the comment that this offense is at its best when the tight ends are doing what they are supposed to do. And that doesn't mean catching passes. We all know, we've all talked about it. The Ohio State tight ends don't catch a ton of passes. We've seen guys that can do it. They don't use them that way. Maybe that'll change if G. Scott Jr. Really emerges. But that tight end group does a lot of the grunt work, helping the offensive line, making blocks on the outside, things like that. Jeremy Ruckert's gone. Where do you see this group? Mitch Rossi, obviously the main returner, 6-year guy, but he's not a big pass catcher, more of an H-back, fullback type of guy. How do you see this shaking out with Joe Royer, G. Scott, some of the other guys? We don't even know where Cade Stover's going to play.
Yeah, well, I think Cade Stover's going to stay on defense. I'll be
too.
shocked if he doesn't. In fact, I think he'll probably be that Leo, that hybrid outside linebacker defensive end. So Mitch Rossi is probably going to be like the starter, the blocker, the guy that's, that hybrid, as Pat was saying, like fullback, H-back. But they need either G. Scott Jr. or Joe Royer, or I guess Sam Hart or Bennett Christian. They need one of those guys, most likely G. Scott Jr. or Joe Royer, who are entering their 3rd year, to step up and be either not, if not the starter, a clear number 2. You're going to need somebody, because Mitch Rossi is very good in his role, but you're going to need another tight end. Now, I don't think they're going to use as much 12 personnel this year as they have in the past, meaning 2 tight ends on the field together. But they're going to need one of those guys to step up. And Kevin Wilson seems pretty bullish on G. Scott Jr., so we'll see what happens there. He continues to bulk up. I think one of those guys needs to step up. It's definitely not a deep room. It's not a proven room. Ryan Day mentioned he didn't use the word concern, but he said, that's something they got to get ironed out is figuring out the depth chart at tight end. But they've got, again, Kevin Wilson said G. Scott Jr.'s got a very high ceiling, so I'd keep an eye on him.
Yeah, and he kind of broke it down as like certain guys can do certain things, and they can, he labeled some guys as guys that can flex out and guys that'll be at the end and it'll be blockers. So they can do some different things. We've obviously seen, even though Mitch Rossi's not a big pass catcher, he's caught some big passes. I think he had 4 receptions last year, one big one in the Rose Bowl. Yep. So he can make a play when you don't expect it, similar to what we've seen with tight ends of the past. Christopher Scurry asked about the receivers that have stood out to us. We saw three periods of one practice so far. So we haven't seen much. We talked about the receivers a bit earlier. Look, they're talented. I mean, we know that as we go through
best receiving group in the country.
Yeah. So as we go through spring, we'll be able to answer some more of that as we see a little bit more. I don't know if we'll ever get a full practice. There was talk of that before spring practice, and now it looks like we may only get little bits and pieces. But we'll keep doing these throughout spring practice. Obviously, Dave, Dan Rubin are doing the BM5s this way in the morning. So we're going to be doing a lot of this stuff. So as I said at the beginning, please like, subscribe, YouTube, Facebook, follow on Twitter, obviously, for all that good coverage. Dave, you've already got a story about Jim Knowles that you put up this morning. Was that this morning about
It was
tackling?
or
Last night?
yeah.
Yeah, Wednesday night. So if you want to read more about what Dave was talking about Jim Knowles and the tackling Ohio State, that's already videos, everything later today from the interviews here. Obviously, more stories. Steve and I are on our way to Indianapolis. We'll be doing basketball stuff this evening. Buckeyes play at 9 p.m. Thursday night against Penn State in the second round. So, Dave, thanks for doing this with me. We're going to depart the WAC now and head on home. Thanks to everyone for tuning in. Thanks for those who listen afterwards. Have a good day, Buckeye fans. We'll talk to you guys soon. Next week's spring break, so we won't be doing anything next week from practice. Still have the normal podcast, but we'll be back here in 2 weeks ready to go as the Buckeyes pick it back up.